Hi everybody. I'm going to show you the steps for doing our painting with text. We had worked with this image, and it's the one that I'll use for my screencast here. But at this point, you should have your own image, and I'm going to show you the steps and the process to go through this. We'll go pretty slow so that you can do this on your own. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing that you're going to want to do is usually pictures work better when they're in grayscale. So I'm going to come up to Image, Mode, and Grayscale. And you're probably working with a color image, so I would discard that color, and if it asks you to flatten or don't flatten, say don't flatten. Okay? But later on we're going to be adding color into this, so we will have to come back to Image, Mode, and then RGB Color. So Image, Mode, RGB Color, and let's go back to color for later. Okay, so first thing we need to do is create a layer. So here's our layers palette. I'm going to create a new layer. And it looks like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my brush tool. Now don't be mistaken with the brush tool that you see here. This is the real brush tool. This is the one I want. It's underneath the Band-Aid tool. I'm going to select that brush. And let's drop down our screen here. Or drop down our brushes. And scroll all the way probably towards the bottom. You're going to see, if you've downloaded it, all of our brushes. And I'm going to take one, if you kind of look closely, I'm going to take one that has kind of a lot of letters, not the ones that are kind of light. So I'll start with this one here. It's 1896 brush. You can see it's very large. If it is, then I would scale down your brush, and that's using your bracket keys next to the P button on your keyboard. I'm going to scale down to about this small. And I need to be painting in black. So right here, I'm going to click on this little icon here, and that defaults our colors to black and white. And I'm going to paint a little bit. Now you can see when I'm painting, it's looking gray. And I'm going to kind of come up here, and I can see that my opacity is down. So I'm going to make sure that that is at 100%. And now when I paint, just like about this much, you can see, here it is. It's on that layer. Now what we need to do is, I need to duplicate my background layer, because we're going to be doing something called clipping masks. So I'm going to drag this background layer into the new layer icon, and we get a copy. Now that copy I'm going to drag above the layer that I just painted on. Please be sure you're painting on that new layer. From here, I'm going to right-click my background copy layer, and I'm going to go to something called clipping mask. When you do that, it's not going to look like anything happened, but something did happen. We just need to slip a black layer in between or above the background. So I'm going to make a new layer, and here it is. I'm going to just call it black, and I'm going to move that below, in between, or right above the background layer, and I'm going to fill it in black. So over here, we have a gradient tool, but if I hold it down, you can see my paint bucket. I'm going to make sure that my foreground color is black, which it is, and I'm going to fill that layer in. And you can see, now I can see the text coming through because I've made a black layer. If that was off, it would be the same exact copy as the background layer, and that's why I'm not seeing it. So I'm going to turn on the black layer and see there it is. Now, this is not enough. I need to do another one. So I need another painting layer, and I'm going to do the process over again. This is how we're going to get some depth and layering with this text. Okay, so if you've done only one, you need to do another and possibly a third time. Let's see. I'm going to make a new layer, and this is going to be my new painting layer, and I might want to start naming these layers. This was the layer that I had painted before. You can see the text on it. So I'll call it Text 1. And this layer is going to be Text 2. That'll help. Okay, so text 2, put it all the way to the top. If you double click, you get this here, just cancel that out. I'm going to pull this all the way to the top. And it's tough to paint on something I can't see well, so I'm going to temporarily disappear all of the layers except for the background layer. And being sure that I'm still on text 2 layer, I'm going to get my paintbrush. And I'm going to choose a different brush this time. I'm going to choose maybe something that something a little different. So this one has a little lighter on the letters, so I'm going to go with this 1840 here. And you can see it's a little large, so I'm going to scale it down. And ready, here we go. I'm going to paint them on text layer 2, and there. Now, sometimes your brush looks like a stamp. You can see how it looks like it's repeating itself. So why don't we talk about how to change that? I'm going to go to Window, Brushes. Window, Brushes. And over here, we have our options for brushes, and you can see it looks like a stamp. It's stamping. If I just turn on Shape Dynamics and then click the word Shape Dynamics, I'm going to make sure that the angle jitter is all the way up. And you can see now it's doing this, but it's also doing this thing where it's kind of pinching and it's getting shorter. So I'm going to, if it happens to you, I'm going to turn off. This should be on off. You can see now it's just random. All we did was move the angle jitter up to 100%. I'm going to just close this out. And now you can see if I just went back and forth, you can see it's not stamping. But on layer text 2, I'm going to paint some down. Good. And here we go. What do? I'm going to get another background layer, so I'm going to drag that to the new layer icon. That's going to go above the text layer. And let's do the clipping mask. I'm going to right-click this new background and create clipping mask. Now you're not going to see anything happen until we turn on the black layer, and then I can also turn on the other layers, and you can see now I have 2 layers of text. Now this is what I do from here. I select either text 1 or text 2, and I decide which one would look better if I lower the opacity on it. And you can see if I lower the opacity on this, you can see some of the other letters from the other layer kind of come forward. I'll try it though for this one. I'm going to keep it 100%. Let's turn this one down now. So I think I'm liking this a little bit better. I'm just kind of fading out text layer 2 a little bit, and that's allowing text 1 to come forward some. Okay, you could potentially do another layer, do this process again, but I'm going to move on to the next steps, which is kind of adding that cloud effect. So to add that cloud effect, I'm going to be sure I'm selected on the top layer here, and I'm going to create a new layer. Okay, and this layer, I'm going to get a selection tool. I'm going to get the elliptical marquee tool. Okay, so holding down the rectangular marquee tool, I get the elliptical marquee tool, and I'm just going to make a small circular selection about this big. Okay, now that selection needs to be feathered, and that softens the edge. So let's do that. I'm going to go up to Select, Modify, Feather. And I'm going to feather this 80 pixels, real large feather. And I'm going to say OK. Making sure I'm on this new layer. Why don't we call it Clouds? Okay. Making sure I'm on the Clouds layer. I'm going to also make sure that I'm still in black and white here. I'm going to come up to the top, go to Filter, go to Render, and Clouds. And what's going to happen is it's going to curate this kind of soft cloud. And it's leaking outside of the selection area because we feathered it. From here, I'm going to deselect. So I can just go to Select, Deselect, or that's Apple D, Command D. So to get rid of the selection. I can then go to the Move tool, and I can move this cloud around. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scale it up. So Command T to scale. I'm going to hold Shift and grab from a corner and scale up and then move so that the cloud is above the face. And press Return. From here, I'm going to make a new layer on top of the clouds layer. So ready? Here's the new layer icon. Brand new layer up top. And this layer I'm going to call Gradient. The Gradient layer, I'm going to get my Gradient tool. So I'm going to hold down the paint bucket and go to Gradient tool. Here, I'm going to click in this area here. In here, don't drop it down, just click inside of this colored box. And this is where I can make a gradient myself. So I like to kind of start with possibly the full rainbow, so I get the full spectrum of color, and then decide which colors I want to keep or get rid of. So I'm going to drop out maybe, so I can pull these tabs, I can drop out maybe the yellows and the greens, and I'm just going to try to be left with maybe just my magenta, cyan, and blue. And this is the one that I want. Now, I could potentially click one of these tabs and change the color myself, but I'm just going to keep this for now. I'm going to say OK to that gradient. And the gradient tool, I'm selected on it, it's a little crosshair, you can see that. I'm going to just drag from corner to corner, and it's going to cover up my whole screen. But this is where we're going to use a blend mode. Our blend modes are here when we drop down normal. And I'm going to go right to overlay. And you can see the colors coming through. Now I can redrag my gradients to kind of get a different look. You know, maybe I like that better, seeing the magenta up there. So I'm stretching it a different direction to help. Okay. All right. But sometimes overlay is a little strong. So I typically like, for this project, going to the soft light. So I get a little bit more detail, and it's a little bit more hazy like a cloud would be. So I chose soft light instead. Now the last thing we're going to do is we want to boost some of the brightness in the face. And this is something you could have done before the clouds. Let's do it now. I need a new layer. And I would like you to fill that layer black. So I'm on black, and I'm going to fill in black. I'm then going to go up to Filter, Render, and Lens Flare. Filter, Render, Lens Flare. And there's a few different types of flares. I'm going to choose the 105 millimeter. And I'm going to move it into the center and bring up the brightness as much as I can without it leaking off the edge. So I've got a 129 about. And I'm going to say OK. Now it looks like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this layer, and let's call this flare. I'm going to move this layer so that it is below the clouds, right there. And I am going to change the blend mode to something called Color Dodge. Now when you go with Color Dodge, it looks too bright, okay? And what I'll do is this. I'm going to temporarily disappear my gradients and my clouds so that I can see what's happening. And I'm then going to get my Move tool. I'm going to get my Move tool, and you can see how I can move this flare around. Now again, it's a little too bright and it looks almost a little bit bluish. So over here, instead of lowering the opacity, which makes it very muddy, I'm going to lower this thing right here called the fill. And when I lower the fill, you can see that I'm keeping the brightness, and I'm lowering it to about a 70% here, keeping the brightness, but you can see what it looked like without and with it now. And I'm going to put this flare kind of in that eye, that nice focal point. From here, I can turn back on the clouds layer and the gradient layer, and that's it. And you can see that it really makes a difference. If I turn off the flare and I turn it on, there's a huge difference in the piece. So I'm going to keep that. Okay, and then that's it. You're finished. Try to do it yourselves, guys, okay? Good luck.